Everyone else apart from me and Django, that would be brilliant. Are you ready, Julio? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and assembled company, wherever you are in this world and whatever time of day it is in this world, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. And tonight we have a treat. We try and add as many countries as possible. We've got most of the world to go, so we've only got about 20 odd countries so far, and there's a huge number more to go. It might take us about another 3 years before we get all around the world. It's a bit like going in an air balloon or something. But tonight, for the first time from Hungary, we've got new country, Hungary, brilliant, just over the border from Julio, and we are very happy to welcome Shenga Solka, and the floor is yours, and you can natter on for as long as you like, and then we'll all retire to the bar afterwards and have a drink with you. Okay. So Shenga, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and it's lovely to get to tell some stories, even if it's through a screen. And I'm really happy that I get to see all of you while I'm telling. And one of you is Santa Claus, so that's very nice. Well, I was asked to tell you some Hungarian folktales in English, and we'll see how it goes. I have a lot of stories. I haven't quite decided yet exactly which ones I'm going to do in which order, but we'll see. There is one that I would like to start with because it is a traditional story, Hungarian story, that is also a traditional opening for storytelling sessions. Egyszer volt, hol nem volt, még az óperenciás tengeren is túl, még az üveghegyen is túl, ahol a kurtafarkú kismalacka túr. A tüzes tengerek 77. szigetén volt egy fa, s fának 77. ágán volt egy szoknya, szoknyának 77. ráncában volt egy zseb, és zsebben volt egy könyv, s a könyvnek 77. lapján volt egy mese. Ezt a mesét fogom most elmondani nektek. Or, as you say in English, once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a king, and he had a son. He had an only son, a prince. And that prince was known as the Sad Prince. And he was known as the Sad Prince because he never smiled. Nobody ever saw him laugh. And that was mostly because his father was perpetually disappointed in him. We know fathers like that. The king was disappointed because his son was not a great diplomat. He was not very good at politics. He was not very good at law. He was not a great swordsman. He was pretty much mediocre in anything that a prince would have to know in order to become a king. He was not really good at anything. And that annoyed the king day by day. And he tried to make his son a better heir to the throne, and he kept failing. And the prince was getting more and more frustrated and sad that he could not live up to the expectations of his father. And when the king was really, really angry, occasionally he would say, he doesn't even have a good story to tell. He's useless. Well, and because of that, the prince really didn't have a reason to smile most of the time. And one day when he was particularly sad and he was feeling like he did not fit, like he did not belong to the court of his father, he decided that he was going to set out into the world and he was going to become a storyteller. Because he already knew that the sword fighting and the diplomacy and the law and the politics were all lost causes, but he'd never tried telling stories. And he thought, well, maybe if I found a good story to tell, my father would be less disappointed in me. So one early morning, he snuck out of the palace and he went on his way, seeking stories, hoping to become a storyteller. And he walked and he walked and he walked until he reached a deep, dark forest, because there are always deep, dark forests in these stories. And he walked straight into the forest, and he walked and he walked and he walked until he met a little rabbit. And he said, "Oh, little rabbit, brother rabbit, please, please, please stop. Do you have a minute? Could you please teach me a story? I've left the palace. I'm seeking my fortune. I want to become a storyteller, and I don't have a single story to tell. You look like you have some stories. You look very busy. I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but please, please, Mr. Rabbit, could you teach me a story?" The rabbit looked up and he said, "No. I have better things to do. I have a lot of business to attend to. I have to run this way and that way. I have to feed my family. I don't have time to tell stories to you. Go and find somebody else to bother." And the rabbit hopped on, and the prince walked on. And the prince kept walking and walking and walking until he met a wolf. At first, he was a little scared, but his curiosity was stronger. And he said, "Please, brother wolf, do you have a story to teach me? I have left the palace and the kingdom, and I'm seeking someone to teach me a story. I want to be a storyteller. You seem like a big, strong animal. I'm sure you have some exciting stories. Could you please help me become a storyteller?" And the wolf said, "No, I have better things to do. I have to hunt. I have to walk the forest. I have to take care of my pack, my relatives, my family. I don't have time to tell stories to you. Go and find somebody else." And the wolf walked on, and the prince walked on. The prince kept walking and walking through the woods until he encountered a bear. The bear was really scary. The prince, from a safe distance, called out, "Hey, Mr. Bear, please, could you teach me a story? I want to become a storyteller, and I don't have any stories to tell. I'm sure you have some really great stories. Could you please teach me one?" And the bear looked down at the prince, and he said, "No." And then he just walked off. And the prince walked on, and he walked and he walked, and he was sad and he was tired, and he walked until he reached the other end of the woods, and he walked out, and there was a green hill, and on the green hill there was a willow tree. The prince walked up to the willow tree, and he leaned against it, and he said, "Oh, willow tree, please, could you teach me a story? Nobody's willing to tell me any stories, and I want to be a storyteller. Please, dear willow tree, please tell me a story." And the willow tree couldn't talk. So the prince walked on, and he kept walking and walking and walking until he reached a city. And in that city, he found a house. And as he peeked in through the doorway, he could see people gathered in that house telling stories. So he stayed. He was standing way in the back in the doorway, listening to the stories that people were telling, and he smiled. And that is why they say that whenever people gather to tell stories, there is always one more person, the sad prince, listening to the tales that are being told. And I think even online, when we are telling these stories in a digital space, you never know who might hear these stories later on and where in the world they might find somebody who needs to hear them. So this is how we begin our storytelling tonight.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. So there are many stories that I've looked at recently. I was working on a book project originally titled Feminist Hungarian Folktales, because I firmly believe that our storytelling tradition has a lot more folktales about strong and brave and clever women than how most people think. Most people think that, oh, fairy tales, it's always the guy is always the hero and kills the dragon, and the girls are always waiting to be rescued. And we have a lot of stories when that is not the case. And I went to the folklore archives. We have the National Ethnographic Museum in Budapest, and they have the folklore archives, which is basically a big archive and library for all the manuscripts that never got published. So you can go in there and find all these boxes of manuscripts, and you can search for collections of folk tales that got written down by hand or on typewriter, decades ago, and then they never saw the light of day again. So I found a lot of really wonderful stories, and the collection that came out of it is in Hungarian, and it's titled Red Currants at the End of the World. And I love red currants. They are little berries, the little fruit. And this is the story that goes with that. Once upon a time, there was a widow, a poor widow, and she had an only child, a daughter, and her name was Ribizli. And Ribizli is Hungarian for red currants, because that was the only fruit that this girl would eat. That was the only thing that she would ever eat. She ate them for breakfast and lunch and dinner, and for snacks between meals. That was the only thing that she would ever eat. And when she was a toddler, that was kind of okay, because toddlers do that sometimes. They just decide that that's the only thing that they are willing to eat. But the years went on, and Ribizli would still only ever eat red currants. Sometimes white and black currants, but mostly red. And that's what she got named after. Nobody knew her by any other name but Ribizli, even her mother. And time went by, and she grew up, and she became quite a beautiful girl. She had beautiful, bright red curls, and she would still only eat red currants for breakfast and lunch and dinner. Until one day, a terrible thing happened. There was a drought, and the little garden that the poor widow kept up to feed her strange daughter with all this fruit, the little garden dried up, and there was no fruit to eat. And Ribizli started starving. And even though she was starving, she would not eat anything else. And her cheeks turned pale, and she started losing weight, and her eyes had circles, dark circles under them. And still she would not eat anything but red currants. And her mother became seriously worried that her daughter was going to die of starvation because she refused to eat anything else but red currants. Well, the poor widow knew that there was a nunnery nearby in town, and the nuns had this great big garden that they had all kinds of vegetables and fruit in. And she happened to know that the nuns had great stores of red currants in the nunnery gardens. So she decided to sneak in and steal some until she could figure out a better way to feed her daughter. So one night, she wrapped herself in her shawl, and she snuck into the nunnery gardens, and she started picking red currants for her daughter. But as she did so, the Mother Superior was called in, and somebody told her that they heard some strange noises in the gardens at night. And the Mother Superior took a lantern, and she went to investigate, and she found the poor widow stealing the fruit. Of course, she was furious. How dare you, under the eyes of God, come in to steal from the nunnery gardens? The poor widow started crying, and she begged for forgiveness, and she told the Mother Superior that she was trying to keep her daughter alive because she would only ever eat red currants, and she was about to starve to death. At first, Mother Superior didn't believe her. What do you mean? What kind of a person could possibly exist who only ever eats red currants? And then the poor widow said, well, my daughter, her name is Ribizli, and please forgive me, but I don't want her to die. So the Mother Superior accompanied the poor widow to her little cottage because she would not believe that this story was true. But when she entered the little cottage with her lantern, she found Ribizli lying in bed, and she was pale, and she was skinny, and she was dying of starvation, even though there was food in the cottage. And the Mother Superior looked at the girl, and she said, all right, I see that you were telling the truth. And what kind of a person would I be if I let somebody starve when I can help? Give your daughter to me. I will take her to the nunnery, and she can live with us there. She will get the good education. We will take good care of her, and she can eat as much of the red currants as she wants, and she will not starve. Well, the poor widow was sad that she had to part from her daughter. The nunnery rules were very strict, and the novices that lived there didn't usually get to leave. But she thought that was still better for her daughter than starving to death, so she agreed. And Ribisley agreed. She didn't really feel like she wanted to be a nun. She never really considered going to the nunnery as an option, but she was very hungry and she knew that they had a lot of fruit. So she accompanied the Mother Superior and she moved into the nunnery and she became a novice. And it was nice. She got education. She learned to read and write. She liked the library of the nunnery. She liked to read the books that were there, and she loved the gardens. And she could eat black currants and white currants and red currants for breakfast and lunch and dinner and for snacks in between. And soon her cheeks were rosy again and her smile was back, and she lived very happily in the nunnery, except she really missed going outside. She really missed talking to people. She missed mingling with the people of the town. And for lack of a better option, she used to open her little window that opened to the street. And she would sit there and she would comb her red curls and she would watch people passing by. She liked watching people on the street. She liked watching things happen. And she liked daydreaming about going outside and making new friends and just being free to do as she pleased. But for lack of a better option, she lived in the nunnery. Until one day, beautiful sunny day, she was sitting in the window. She was combing her beautiful red curls. And as she was sitting in the window, the king's 3 sons happened to pass by. And the oldest prince looked up. He saw the red-haired girl in the nunnery window and he stopped in his tracks. And he stopped so suddenly that his younger brother coming right behind him walked straight into it, and they both tumbled. They fell to the ground. The youngest prince was coming along. He was also looking at the girl in the window and he tripped over them. So the 3 princes were rolling on the ground and started fighting about who saw her first and who would get to go and talk to her. And it came to them punching each other and clawing each other and yelling at each other. And it was a disgrace to see the king's 3 sons rolling around in the dirt fighting about a girl. And there was a huge ruckus and people started standing in a circle around them and yelling things. And the Mother Superior was notified that there is something going on outside the nunnery. So she came outside. And by that time, people managed to pull the 3 princes apart from each other and stop them from punching each other. And well, it soon came out that they'd been fighting about that beautiful red-haired girl that they saw in the window. So the Mother Superior did what she believed was the right course of action after this. She went to talk to Ribisley because this was obviously her fault. So she went and found Ribisley in her room, and she told her that she's a disgrace, and what kind of a shameless girl would show herself off in a nunnery window and cause such a fight? Like, what was she thinking, making the king's sons fight like that? And she tried to defend herself. She tried to tell the Mother Superior she was not trying to make anybody fight. She was just getting some sunshine and fresh air, and she was just sitting in the window. She didn't mean for all of that to happen. She didn't even wave or smile to the princes, but the Mother Superior was really angry. She was kind of scared that this would come back on the nunnery and the king would be angry at them for harboring a girl who does such indecent things as combing her hair in public. So she told Ribisley that this was her fault and she should be ashamed of herself. And Ribisley said, well, with all due respect, I don't think this was my fault. I believe that I am not at fault here, and I believe that I am as nice and polite and obedient a person as one can be. You believe so, said the Mother Superior. Well then, I wish you would turn into a lizard and you can take your kindness and your beauty and your politeness all the way to the end of the world. And so it happened. I don't know where the Mother Superior's powers came from. Maybe she didn't know either. But the moment she spoke those words, Ribisley turned into a little golden lizard. And she ran out of the nunnery and she ran all the way to the horizon. She disappeared. Well, meanwhile, Meanwhile, the king called his sons to him, and he heard about the fight on the street, and he was ashamed of their conduct. And he yelled at them for a while, and then he told them that it looks like it's high time for all three of them to start considering serious issues of government, because all three of them were adults now and old enough to start learning how a king should rule, because he had not decided yet which one of them would be his heir. So he decided that he was going to give them tests to see which one would be worthy of becoming the next king. And he told his three sons that the first thing that they had to do was to go out and bring him linen that was that was as wide and as long as the largest bed sheet in the castle, and yet it was so fine that it could be pulled through a golden ring. That was the kind of cloth he wanted his sons to bring him, and he said that whoever brings the finest linen, the finest cloth that they could find, would win the first trial. So the three princes set out, and they walked together until they reached a point in the road when there were three separate roads to continue on. And two of those three roads were wide and easy and smooth, and the third one was barely a path right through the deepest, darkest woods, like through the thorn bushes and the hedges and everything. So the two older princes looked at their little brother, whose name was Paco, and they said, well, Paco, you go that way because you're the youngest. The two older princes set off on the two nice, easy roads, and Paco had to walk the narrow path through the thorn bushes and the hedges and the deep, dark woods. And he had no idea how he was going to find any linen in this area, let alone linen that his father wanted. So he kept walking and walking and walking, and he walked all the way to the edge of the world. It was a lot of walking. There's a whole lot of steps. And he reached the edge of the world, and there was no way to go further, but there was a bridge at the edge of the world, and the bridge was leading into nothing, into nowhere. So Paco sat down by the bridge, and he was trying to figure out what to do next when there was a little voice. Hello, are you a prince? Welcome to the edge of the world. What are you doing here? What brings you this far from everything? Paco looked around, and he saw a little golden lizard sitting there on the edge of the bridge. And he said, well, my father sent me out to find linen, and he told the lizard what he was seeking. And the lizard, who was none other than Ribisley herself, she said, oh, well, maybe I can help you with that, but you will have to do something in exchange. Well, the prince was not really used to doing things in exchange for anything in his life, but he said, yes, sure. Tell me what you need from me, and I will do my best. And Ribisley said, well, first, I want you to clear this great big open space here at the edge of the world. I want you to clear this field from all the weeds and the thorn bushes. And when you've cleared it, I will get you your linen. Paco, once again, he was a prince. He was not used to having to work with his own two hands, and he's certainly never cleared a field. But for lack of a better option, he took off his coat and he rolled up his sleeves and he got to work. And he worked on the field. He really put his back into it, and he was pulling up weeds and pulling up thorn bushes, and the thorns were scratching his hands, and he was sweating and he was tired and his back was aching, but he kept working. Meanwhile, the little lizard went under the bridge that led to nowhere, because it might have led to nowhere, but there were friends living under the bridge. There were spiders that had their little nets there, and Ribisley was very good friends with the spiders. Ever since she'd arrived to the edge of the world, she had been talking with the spiders, and she told them stories about the world. She told them stories about the time when she used to be human. And the spiders really liked her, and she really liked the spiders. She loved marveling at their nets, the spider webs, and their work. And now she told them that there was this prince here breaking his back to clear the field at the edge of the world, and he was seeking this linen that was so fine that it could be pulled through a golden ring. And the spiders decided to help. So by the time Paco finished clearing that field and he was all sweaty and dirty and bloody and tired, the little lizard had this length of linen for him that was so fine, like the fine spider web. And she folded it up. She put it in a walnut shell, and she handed it to the prince. So he said, thank you. He thanked the little lizard 1,000 times, and he turned around and he walked and walked and walked all the way back to the crossroads where he met his brothers who were carrying lengths of linen from the nearest towns that they found. And they all went back to the king. And the 2 older brothers were laughing at how their youngest brother somehow managed to come back without any linen at all. But when it was time to show the king what they had, they showed the 2 lengths of linen, and he said, well, that is fine, that is nice, but it does not go through a golden ring. And then Paco pulled out his length of linen from the walnut shell, and he unfolded it, and it was beautiful and smooth, and it flew through the golden ring of the king like a breath of air. And the king said, oh, that's nice. All right, my sons, here is the second thing that you have to do. You have to go and get me a dog. But I want a dog that is very small. I want a dog so small that it would fit into a walnut shell. And I want this dog to be loud enough that its barking can be heard in 7 kingdoms. But the 3 princes did not question why their father wanted such a dog specifically, but they all set out once again. And when they reached the crossroads, the 2 older princes went on the nice wide roads, and Paco went on the narrow little path that went through the thorn bushes and the hedges and the deep dark woods. And once again, he walked and he walked. He had no idea where to find a dog like that. And he once again ended up at the edge of the world, at the bridge. And there was the little golden lizard. Well, Prince Paco, you're back. I'm so happy to see you again. What happened? Did your father like the linen? Oh, yes, he liked it very much. But now he gave me something else to find, and I'm not sure you can help me with that. Well, tell me anyway. Maybe I can help. Well, Paco told the lizard that he was seeking this very specific kind of dog, and the lizard thought about it, and she said, maybe I can help you, but you will have to do something in exchange. And Paco said, all right, what do you want me to do? Well, you've cleared this field the last time you were here, so now I want you to plow it, and then I want you to sow seeds in it. I want you to sow wheat in this field. Well, Prince Paco had never done anything like that before. He's never plowed a field, and he was beginning to think that this was harder work than princes and noblemen were led to believe, but he was willing to give it a try. So he walked all the way back to a place where he could borrow an ox and a plow, and he walked all the way back to the edge of the world, and he got to work. And he was doing his very best, and he was sweating, and he was dirty, and his hands were getting calluses. And while he was doing that, Ribisley went through a little hole by the bridge deep underground, and she went through all the secret tunnels and the secret caves and crevices until she arrived to the underground kingdom of the dwarves. Because below our world, there is another world filled with other kingdoms and other stories. And Ribisley discovered that little hole soon after she'd arrived to the edge of the world, and she was curious and she liked to make friends. So obviously she went down through the hole and she found the dwarf kingdom and she made friends. She was really good friends with the king of the dwarves, and she would visit him and she would talk with him and she would tell him stories and she would learn the stories of the dwarf kingdom. And she was a frequent visitor there and they really liked her. So now when she visited the dwarf king, he immediately smiled and he said, "Oh, it's you. Have you come to tell us more stories?" "Well, I have one. I have a new story to tell." And Ribisli told the dwarf king about this prince who keeps coming with strange things that his father wants, and he works really hard to get them. He's willing to break his back and work the fields with his own hands to get what his father sent him for. The dwarf king said, "Well, he sounds like he could be a very good king one day. So I will help you if I can." And the dwarf king whistled and his dogs ran up to him. And because he was a dwarf king, his dogs were also very, very small. And one of them had pups. And there was a pup that was just tiny enough that it could fit inside a walnut shell. It was tiny and it was red and green and purple and blue. It was a really strange little dog, but it barked. And when it barked, the sound echoed through the entire underground kingdom, and everybody had to put their hands on their ears. And Ribisli said, "Well, it sounds like this is the pup that the prince is looking for." So she took the walnut shell and the little pup and she went all the way back up to the surface. And by the time she got back to the bridge at the edge of the world, Paco was sitting there and he was sore all over and there were bloody blisters on his hands and he was dirty and dusty, and the field was plowed and sowed. And he said, I'm not sure if I did it right, but I did my best." And Ribisli said, "Well, here you go. Here is your dog and good luck with your father." And Paco stayed a little bit. Ribisli showed him a little fountain with clear, fresh water so that he could wash up and he could drink. And they talked a little and they told each other some stories. And then Paco went all the way back to the crossroads where he met his brothers who were leading these really fancy little dogs on leashes. And neither of those fancy little dogs was small enough for a walnut shell, but they were the closest thing that they could get in town. So the three princes went back to their father. The two older princes paraded their dogs, and the dogs were they were very tiny, but they were not tiny enough. And they were very loud, but they were not loud enough. And then Paco reached into his pocket, pulled out the walnut shell, and a little dog jumped out and it started barking at it. Barking was so loud that it echoed through the kingdom and all through 7 kingdoms. And people days and days later were still sitting there in the 7th kingdom going, "What was that?" Well, the king said, "All right, good job. There is only one more task left for you to do, to show me that you are serious about being a good king. And the third task is this: whichever of you brings home the most beautiful bride will be my heir." Paco was beginning to think that none of these tests had anything to do with how good a king somebody would be. But that was what his father told him to do. So he sat down with his brothers. His brothers chose the easy paths right to the neighboring towns when they had been flirting with some very, very pretty girls anyway. And Paco once again took the third road through the bushes and the hedges and the deep dark woods, and he ended up at the edge of the world. And by this time, there was a beautiful, beautiful golden field of wheat that was there on the field that he'd cleared and plowed and sown. And he sat down and the golden lizard was nowhere to be seen. Paco was sitting there looking at the field that he'd worked on, and he felt this sense of pride, even though he felt like he was surely going to fail the last test. Suddenly there was the voice. "Hello, Paco. You're back again. It's good to see you. You look sad. Why do you look sad? What happened? Did your father not like the dog?" Oh, he liked the dog," said Paco, "but his third task, he told me to bring the most beautiful bride in the world, and I don't know if there are any brides around these parts at the edge of the world." And the golden lizard looked at him. She considered the thing and she said, "Well, maybe I can help you with that. But first, you have to do something in return. Here's the field that looks beautiful and golden, and this is the field that you cleared and plowed and sown. And now I want you to harvest this field. I want you to gather all the wheat. And when you're done with that, maybe I will be able to help you. So Paco did what he'd done before. He's never done this before in his life, but he walked all the way back and borrowed a scythe and the sickle from some people. And he walked all the way back to the edge of the world, and he took off his coat and rolled up his sleeves, and he got to work. And he'd never done anything like this in his life, but he really put his back into it, and he was trying to do his very best. And at first it was really awkward. If you ever try to like work with a scythe, it's very awkward. It takes a lot of time to learn, but he was trying his very best. And he worked and he worked, and he was sweaty and dirty and tired, and there was just wheat everywhere, and there was grass everywhere, and he was sneezing, and he was thirsty, and he was hungry, and he was tired. And when he finished clearing all of the field, he turned around and he ran back to the bridge, and he wiped his forehead and he said, well, I hope it was worth it. And he looked up, and on the bridge was a beautiful, beautiful girl with long red curls down on his shoulders. And she had a smile on her face, and she said, well, I can't tell if I'm the most beautiful of all the girls, but I would be your bride if you would like it. And Paco looked at her and he smiled and he said, you're the lizard. And she said, yes. Do you remember me? And he looked at her and he said, I do, but where have I seen you before? And she laughed and she said, well, you remember the red-haired girl in the nunnery window that you fought your brothers about? And she told him her story. She told him how she'd reached the edge of the world and she made a new home there and she made friends there. And he smiled and he realized who she was. And then he took her home, and his two older brothers were there with their brides. And Ribisli was really, really beautiful. And Prince said, Father, I can't tell what your judgment is going to be, but to me, Ribisli is the most beautiful of all the women in the world. And if you are not willing to make me your heir, then that is fine by me. But I will make a home with her or at the edge of the world. Well, the king smiled and he listened to all the stories. He listened to the stories of how his 3 sons got the linens and the dogs and the brides. And when he heard all that Paco had done at the edge of the world, how he worked and how he learned and how he was willing to make mistakes, he immediately knew that he was the one fit to be a king and rule over a kingdom. And so he made Paco his heir. And Paco married Ribisli. And he planted a great big garden of red currants for her around the palace. So from that point on, all the way to the end of her life, Queen Ribisli could eat as much of the fruit as she wanted. And they lived happily ever after.
Wonderful, wonderful. There's a remarkable lack of princes on white horses saving maidens, but there's an enormous number of women and girls getting men and boys out of trouble.
Yes.
in storytelling and probably in life. Oh, that was wonderful. Have you got one more little story for us?
Yes.
Well, there's people joining us and we love your stories. So please tell us one more.
And thank you for the comments. I see the comments popping up and thank you so much. Yeah, I like this story. This story is a version of a folktale type called The Animal Bride. And some of you probably know it as the Frog Princess from Russia. And there is also a Mouse Princess from Finland that I really like. I really like that version. And in Hungary, it's usually a cat. it's usually a kitty cat. But what I like about Ibisley, apart from the red currants and the golden lizard and the edge of the world and all of that really cool stuff, is that here the prince actually works for what he's asking for. He doesn't just show up and, you know, tell the frog to bring him something. He actually is willing to work, and he's willing to put in the effort to get the things that he's looking for. And I just like Ribisley as a character. So yeah. All right, thank you for the comments. And I have one more story for you. And this is a tale from my favorite Hungarian storyteller, whose name was Pályuk Anna. And she was born in the 1850s and she died in the 1950s. She was almost 100 years old. And she lived in Transcarpathia. It's a part of the Carpathian Mountains that now belongs to the Ukraine. Most of her life, it used to belong to Hungary. And she was not Hungarian, though. She was Russian, which is a Slavic ethnicity that lives in the Carpathian Mountains. But she married into a Hungarian family, and she told her stories in Hungarian. And she has this really strange and rich and beautiful tradition of folklore. So this is one of her stories. Once upon a time, there was a poor old woman who only had two things in this world. She had a cow and she had a son. And out of those two things, it was the cow that was more useful. Because the son, well, he loved to daydream. He didn't really do any chores around the house. He loved to go outside and lie in the grass and look up at the clouds. And he loved watching the clouds. He daydreamed about walking on the clouds. They were beautiful and fluffy and white. And he just wanted to go up into the sky and walk on the clouds and roll around in them. And that was all he daydreamed about. And people in their village, frankly, thought that he was a little bit weird. He was a little bit unusual. And some of them were on the opinion that he was a little bit crazy. Well, time went by, and as these stories sometimes go, the poor woman got sick, and one day she passed away, and she left her son with the cow. And the boy did not know what to do with the cow. He never learned, and he didn't really care, and he thought that now would be a great time to set out and try to find a way to walk on the clouds. That had always been his dream. So he decided that he was going to gift the cow to whoever could tell him how to go up to the clouds. And he went to the wisest person in the village, who was the blacksmith that lived on the edge of the village. And the blacksmith saw him coming with the cow, and he thought, oh, well, there comes that weird young man and with his cow. And he went outside and said, well, my son, how can I help you today? And the boy said, well, can you please tell me how to go up to the clouds? I want to give this cow to someone who can tell me. So if you can tell me how to go to the clouds, I will give you my cow. The blacksmith thought, this boy is going to give that cow to someone, so why not me? So he lied. He told the boy, oh, of course I know how to go up to the clouds. All you have to do is turn around, see that big mountain over there. You walk all the way to that mountain. You walk all the way to the top of the mountain. And from the top of that mountain, you will be able to step onto the clouds. It's easy. Everybody knows that. So the boy said, thank you. And he handed the cow over to the blacksmith. And he turned around, and straight away he started walking towards the distant mountains. And the wife of the blacksmith heard all of this, and she looked out the window and she said, aren't you ashamed of yourself? And the blacksmith said, oh, don't worry about it. He was going to give that cow to somebody. Now we have a nice plump cow. And the boy walked, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked a long way. Those mountains were a lot further than he thought they were, until he reached the woods at the foot of the mountains. And by that time, he was very tired, and his food was almost gone. So he stopped on a clearing, and he tried to figure out what to do. And he heard a noise. And he looked around, and he saw one of the bushes moving and shaking, and he walked over, and there was a little white creature, a little white weasel stuck in that thorn bush. Oh, you poor thing. Come on, let me help you. And he very carefully reached into the thorn bush and he extracted the little white weasel and he set it free. The little white weasel ran away into the woods and he sat down and he ate some of his food and he lay down to sleep. The next morning, the boy woke up and he was hungry. So he reached into his satchel for the rest of his food, but it was empty. He looked around, and a few feet away from him, there was the little white weasel eating the last of his food. What? Are you not ashamed of yourself? I helped you and saved you, and you're eating my food. Come back here right now. And he started chasing the white weasel, and the white weasel was running up the mountainside, and the boy was so angry. Everything had gone wrong. He was lost in the woods. He was out of food, and the weasel was just the last drop in the buckets, and he kept chasing that white weasel, and the weasel kept running away from him until he didn't even notice, but he ran all the way up to the top of the mountain. And then when they were up there, the weasel turned around and she said, "Is this what you wanted? Is this where you were heading to?" The boy said, "You can talk." "Yes, of course I can talk. You were heading up the mountain, right? Now here you are. What do you want? What is your wish?" "Well, I would like to walk on the clouds. And they told me if I came up here, I could step on the clouds, but I don't see any clouds." "Oh, well, I can't quite help you with that, but I know the king of the mountains, and the king of the mountains is just about to go on a journey. He has a flying chariot, and he's looking for somebody to accompany him so that he's not alone. And I could take you to him, and you could go with him in the flying chariot, and maybe you could get closer to the clouds that way. But here's one very important thing. You cannot show fear. Whatever you see, whatever happens, just pretend that you've seen it all before." And the boy said, "All right, I can do that. Let's go." And the white weasel led him to the palace of the king of the mountains. King of the mountains had this big black chariot pulled by 6 winged horses. And he was sitting in the chariot already, and he was wrinkled like the rocks of the mountains, and he had a long white beard like the snow on the mountainside. And the little weasel said, "Well, Your Majesty, I found you a companion." The boy got into the chariot. The little white weasel turned over her head, and she turned into a chariot driver. She sat on the chariot, and off they went, flying higher and higher above the mountains up into the sky. And the boy was glued to the window of the chariot. He was looking down, and it was so marvelous. You could see all the fields and the forest, and the rivers were like little blue ribbons, and everything was so beautiful from up there. And he was watching everything from the window until something came into view. Something obscured the window of the chariot. It was a great big eye. And the old king, who had been dozing off, looked up and he said, "Oh, a giant, a giant." And it was indeed a giant. And the boy said, "Oh, don't worry, Your Majesty. It's just a small giant. It's not going to hurt us. I've seen bigger giants before. It is all right. We'll be fine." And the king said, "Oh, all right. Well, all right." And they kept flying. The giant, after a while, went back to whatever he had been doing before. But they saw other marvels along the way. They saw firebirds flying up in the sky. They saw castles floating on golden chains. And they even saw a dragon in the distance with 6 or 7 little dragons flying after it. Until the boy looked out the window and he saw the clouds. And they were beautiful and white and fluffy, and the setting sun painted the edges gold and pink. And he opened the door of the chariot and he stepped out. And he was standing on the clouds. The next moment, a chariot disappeared behind him, and the clouds were just as fluffy and plush and soft and beautiful, and he'd always imagined. And he was standing there taking in the sights and smiling when there was a little voice. Is this what you wanted? Are you happy now? And he looked down and there was a little white weasel, and he said, yes, yes, I'm very happy. This is my dream come true. This is so beautiful. This is more beautiful than I ever imagined. Well, that's good. Is there anything else that you want? Is there anything else that you wish for? Well, no, not really. Well, if anything, I wish that the people who thought that this was impossible would know that I made it. I wish that the people in my village who thought that I was weird and crazy, I wish that they would know that I'm here walking on the clouds. The weasel said, oh, that's easy. I can take you to the edge of the world, and you can push on one of the corners of the world, and you will make a terrible earthquake, and then everybody will know how big a power you have. And the boy said, well, no, I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want them to know. Oh, yeah, then follow me. A little weasel was jumping on the clouds, and the boy was walking behind her, and she led him to a cloud, and she said, look down. And looked down, and there was his village right beneath him. He recognized the houses, and the weasel said, well, drop your hat. The boy took his hat, and he dropped it from the cloud, and the hat fell and fell and fell, and it fell on top of the blacksmith's house, and it went straight through the roof, and the roof caved in. Well, nobody was home at the time because everybody was working outside, but everybody ran to the noise to see what happened, and they saw that something had fallen on the house of the blacksmith. The blacksmith found the hat on top of all the rubble, and he said, well, isn't this the hat of that weird boy who wanted to walk on the clouds? And everybody looked up at the same time. And there was the boy dangling his legs from the edge of the cloud and waving at everyone. And they all waved back. Well, the story says that boy still lives up there. He became the king of the cloud kingdom. And he's very, very happy. And that's the end of the story. Thank you.
Right, that was so good. But before I'm going to ask people to unmute themselves and ask you questions. But before that, I've got a few parish notices. We've got a great week coming up tomorrow. We've got tomorrow at the same time, 6 o'clock. African storytelling. We're celebrating Black History Month, and African storytelling with Yusuf Jallo, Sierra Leone, Zuha from Morocco, and Solar Story from Kenya. So it's going to be a great evening. And Wednesday, I can see him in the square there. We've got David Heathfield. Wave to us, David. Thank you.
Looking forward to it, John.
Yeah. Friday we got Donovan Christopher with Christopher Donovan rather with Poetry for Children. But Sunday is the first of our worldwide story rounds, and of course everyone is invited to that to bring a story to us. So same time next Sunday. Probably the most important notice is that if you look at if you're wherever you are, go to the storytelling site and you will see a little hat beneath Jenga's name. And it's very important that storytellers eat, because if storytellers don't eat, they won't be able to tell us stories. So if you could drop a little into the hat, that would be very much appreciated by Shangar and any storytellers you're listening to. So, and on that, I'm going to, if I was impolite, I'd say I'm going to shut up. But actually, I'm just going to pass the floor to yourselves, and you can ask Shangar questions. And just think that we've gone to the bar, and Chenga's sitting there, and we're all talking to the great performer that's been on just before.
Thank you. All right.
Hi,
Don't
Chenga.
all talk
sorry.
at once.
You first.
No, after you, after you.
Chenga, that was wonderful. I really enjoyed that, and there seemed to be a theme emerging of animals that talk and transformation. Is that really a big key feature of Hungarian folk tales?
Yeah, it happens very often. We have a lot of animal helpers in our stories, and the weasel is not very usual. It's something I think that that Pályuk Anna liked to add to her stories. She has some very unusual things that happen in her folk tales, but I really like it. So yeah, the lizard is not usual. It's most of the time it's frogs or cats or foxes. But I like the stories that are a little bit outside of the ordinary, even by folktale standards.
Yeah, and it's great to have a story with a lizard in it, and then a story with a weasel in it. And I could really relate to the boy with his head in the clouds or his feet in the clouds, because that's what they always called me.
Right? It's a likable character for a lot of storytellers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aidan, you were going to speak.
Yeah, I was going to ask, first of all, how do you say your name? I'm sorry.
Chenga.
Chenga. Beautiful telling, beautiful
you.
voice.
Thank you.
I was going to ask, do you only tell traditional tales, or do you also tell original stories of your own?
Yes and no. I work with traditional stories, but some of the stories I have been telling so long that I sometimes go back to the texts that I started with, and I realize that it has nothing to do with that text anymore. So sometimes just organically, I have a few stories that just organically changed so much that they now qualify as my own story without me noticing. So I never set out to write an original tale, but it sometimes happens in the telling.
Okay, lovely stuff.
Thank you. And I wanted to show that I have
lovely, brilliant stories.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just talking there.
Was it Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's Sarah's.
It is Sarah. I lost you at the end. I got to the weasel and lost.
Oh, your internet is breaking.
I got a new book from of yours for my birthday, so I'm very excited. It is. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm away from.
And if anyone missed any of the earlier stories, because I know some of you got it late, it doesn't matter. You can go and on catch up. Just go to the archive or recent tellers or something, and you can see the whole set, because you really needed to. Hello, you're just joining us.
Can I just say something else? And this is for everybody. 2 days ago, Chenga Zalka, who's here, did an amazing workshop. It's one of the best workshops I've ever been to, and it was about researching stories, researching folk tales, and it was for Feast, the Federation of Asian Storytellers. And if you go to their website, you can still pay and join that workshop, and I would highly recommend it, because I'm fascinated by the topic of research, and Chenga's a leading expert in that area, not as a folklorist, but as a researching storyteller. Isn't that right, Chenga?
Yes, that is right. I enjoy researching stories, which
and
is...
from all over the world.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to show you. I have a book in English. It's called Dancing on Blades, and this is the.
I have it.
Oh wow, nice. It's Pályuk Anna stories. It's all from the storyteller who had the boy who walked on the clouds. It's 30 of her folk tales that I translated into English, and And it was a really fun collection to work on, to have more than 100 stories from the same folk teller, and then pick the ones that I love the most, and the ones that I've been telling a lot, to put them in a book in English, because people kept asking me where they can find these stories, and these folk tales are so specific. I can't really give you an English source for them, so I made one. So that's how Dancing on Blades was born, and it's some of my best, some of my most favorite folk tales, and some of the best parts of my repertoire. So.
Thank you.
Right.
And it's available in the UK?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I know it's on Amazon, but it was published in the US, but it's also on Book Depository. I think people in Europe usually get it from Book Depository because it's cheaper than Amazon.
What about your new book?
Which one? Oh, the latest that I have is in Hungarian, and it's called Traditional Stories About Non-Traditional Families. And it's a collection of folk tales that have kind stepmothers, adoption, foster parents, mosaic families, single parents. So it's a collection of old stories that show that really any family unit can be a good family if they love you and support you. It's not, doesn't depend on how many people make up a family as much as how they treat each other. So that's the collection that I have coming out in Hungary next week. That was my latest project. It was really fun to research and to put together.
We'd love that to be in English sometime. It's a
Yeah.
it's a huge problem finding. I've found stories with stepsisters who are the heroine of the story, and but I've yet to. But stepmothers seem to be continuously evil, you know, which especially in current circumstances is you know, it just doesn't. I'd love to spread, you know, I'd like to. So really, your contribution to the whole world of storytelling next has to be that book in English.
I think it'll sell like
nice.
hotcakes.
Yeah, we're actually considering having it. This is a book that the profits from the book benefit the NGO I work for, which is the Világszép Foundation for Children in State Care. So it benefits of the organization that works with children who are in the foster system. And our founder is Hungarian, and her husband is German, and the German family has been supporting this foundation as well. So she wants to have a German edition of this collection. And then she said that probably because English is much more widely spoken than German, that we would have an English edition of the book so that it could be promoted to a wider readership. Hopefully there will be an English edition as well.
Well, when that happens, yeah, you could do a launch on our. We'll do a launch on the Worldwide Storytelling Cafe.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, so be great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the stepmothers especially was. There is an Icelandic. Iceland has kind stepmothers. I know 5 kind stepmother tales, and 3 of them are from Iceland. So it's really strange how out of all places, that's the place that has stories about kind stepmothers. I'm sure it had to do something with how their society was structured, but there is one where a queen curses her own daughter before she dies, and then the stepmother that the king marries after is the one that helps her break the curse, which is a really, really exciting. It's kind of a grown-up story. The curse, right? The curse says that she will burn down the palace, have a child out of wedlock, and kill a man before she turns, I don't know, 20 something. And so the stepmother helps her get around these things on technicalities, basically. She helps her go through the curse in a way that doesn't hurt more people than it needs to. She does kill a man, but he's very evil. So, so she helps her find the most evil victim possible, which, you know, is questionable, but it's a great story. It's a really,
well, even our pacifist self thinks there are a few people that might deserve it. Should you meet someone who has to do that to pass the
yeah, but I just love the fact that that it's a very nice and kind stepmother who helps untangle a curse left by a biological parent. So it's one of the great stories that I really like.
And that's Icelandic, is it?
Yeah, it's Icelandic.
I don't think it's any coincidence, but Icelandic is an incredibly literate country. I mean, it's just reads more books per head than anywhere else in the world, I think. And yeah, I've been there talking poetry to someone in a bar at night, talking Keats, and then you meet them digging the road the next day. You know,
yeah.
Literacy, I think, that has its advantages. Although we love the oral tradition.
Yeah, and they have a long tradition of literacy. They, you know, the Icelandic sagas were written down very early, so they had very high literacy rates all through the Middle Ages, when the rest of Europe was not doing that great in that regard. So they have a long tradition of that. But I've never been to Iceland. I would love to go. I love Icelandic stories, but I've never been.
Yes, I haven't been there for about 50 years. Well,
I have to go.
well, thank you. Is anyone else before I wish everyone good night and thank Shenge for being our guest tonight. One more round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. And remember, if you missed the early part, go and catch up, because it's well worth it. Lovely. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions about Hungarian folktales or story research or anything, then feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to talk more.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone.